She's moving, and some of it will be strategy, based on having her for fourth quarter, saving some minutes for the fourth quarter, saving some minutes for the second half.
Stephanie White stood in front of a microphone, in front of cameras, in front of the entire Indiana Fever fan base, and told the world that Caitlin Clark would be on a minutes restriction going into a game against the Las Vegas Aces, with A'ja Wilson back and healthy, and she said it like it was completely normal, like it was responsible, like it was the right thing to do. It was not the right thing to do. It was a betrayal. Again. Welcome back, this is Rim Run, and today we are pulling apart every single word Stephanie White said at that press conference, because the math does not add up, the logic does not hold, and the pattern, the undeniable, glaring, brutal pattern of mismanaging Caitlin Clark, is impossible to ignore any longer.
And of course we want her to be out there. I think there are times where you have to try to save a player from themselves when they want to do too much, and that's where it's like, okay.
Let me set the stage for every single person watching this video, because the stakes here are catastrophic, and the establishment does not want you to feel the full weight of them. The Indiana Fever are heading into a game against the Las Vegas Aces. The Aces, one of the most ruthless, battle-tested, championship-caliber rosters in the entire WNBA. A'ja Wilson, the most dominant force in this league, is back. And Stephanie White's answer to that challenge, her strategic response to that mountain, is to put her best player, her most electric player, her franchise-altering player, on a minutes restriction of 20 to 25 minutes. 20 to 25. Let that sink in for a second. You are walking into a firefight, and you are telling your best weapon she can only fire for 20 to 25 minutes. And here is the part that makes it even more maddening. We already know what Stephanie White's promise of 20 minutes actually looks like in practice, because we already watched it happen. Against the LA Sparks, the cap was supposed to be 20 minutes. Caitlin Clark played 15 minutes, not 20, 15. Stephanie White looked a reporter in the eye, said 20, and then played her for 15. So when she stands up and says 20 to 25 against the Aces, you will have to forgive every single person in that fan base for not believing a single syllable of it.
She's moving, and some of it will be strategy, based on having her for fourth quarter, saving some minutes for the fourth quarter, saving some minutes for the second half.
Now let's document exactly what Stephanie White said at this press conference, because the receipts are right here and they are damning. A reporter asked her directly, "What is the plan for Caitlin Clark?" And Stephanie White's answer was that Caitlin Clark would be available, but on a minutes restriction of around 20 to 25 minutes. She then said, and this is where it gets dishonest, she said this represented 10 more minutes than the previous game. 10 more minutes. That was the word she used, 10. But wait, stop right there. If the cap last game was 20 minutes, and the cap this game is 25 minutes, that is a 5-minute difference, not 10, 5. The math is right there, 25 minus 20 equals 5, not 10. Stephanie White told a reporter that the increase was 10 minutes when the actual increase, by her own stated numbers, was 5 minutes at most. And that is before you account for the fact that she promised 20 last time and only delivered 15. So the real increase from what Caitlin Clark actually played, 15 minutes, to the new stated cap of 25 minutes, is 10 minutes on paper. But we have already seen what her stated caps are worth in real time. And then a reporter asked her about the distribution of those minutes. Would she handle it the same way she handled the LA Sparks game, spreading the minutes out by quarter? And Stephanie White started talking about endurance, about rhythm, about timing and flow, about not letting a player sit too long and get stiff, about saving minutes for the fourth quarter, about the back potentially tightening up. She used every single piece of medical and strategic vocabulary available to a head coach, and she assembled it into an answer that, when you strip away all the language, means, I am going to pull Caitlin Clark in and out of this game in short bursts. I am going to make sure she never gets into a real rhythm, and I am going to tell you it is for her health. Don't take my word for it. Here is Stephanie White in her own voice at that press conference, telling you exactly what the plan is.
She's moving, and some of it will be strategy, based on having her for fourth quarter, saving some minutes for the fourth quarter, saving some minutes for the second half.
She said it. Cameras rolling. Strategy based on saving minutes for the fourth quarter, saving minutes for the second half. That is the plan. Not unleashing Caitlin Clark. Not letting her impose her will on the Aces from the opening tip. Saving her. Rationing her. Managing her like a resource that might run out instead of a superstar who needs to be turned loose. There is no spin to put on that. She said it herself. And now I want you to sit with the full picture of what that actually means on a basketball court against this specific opponent. A'ja Wilson is back. The Las Vegas Aces are not the Phoenix Mercury. The Aces do not stink. The Aces are built to punish you for every single mistake, every single lineup miscalculation, every single moment you give them free possessions. And the Indiana Fever's answer to that challenge is to rotate their best player in and out in short bursts, never letting her find a rhythm, never letting her get her legs under her, never letting the game flow through her the way it needs to flow through her for the Fever to have any realistic chance of winning. This is not conservative roster management. This is not sports science. This is not long-term health planning. This is a coach who has consistently, deliberately, and catastrophically underutilized the most important player on her roster, and then stood in front of cameras and dressed it up in language that sounds responsible so that nobody can call it what it actually is. Let me be entirely clear about what the tactical failure looks like in practice. When you bring a player in and out of a game every 2 or 3 minutes, which is the rotation pattern we already watched Stephanie White use against the Sparks, that player cannot get into a rhythm. She cannot find her shot. She cannot read the defense. She cannot build the kind of momentum that separates a good performance from a great one. Every time Caitlin Clark sits down, the Aces defense resets. Every time she comes back in, she has to spend 2 possessions just reacclimating to the pace of the game. By the time she is locked in and dangerous, Stephanie White is already thinking about pulling her again to protect the minutes cap. It is a self-defeating cycle. It guarantees mediocrity. And it is being done to the most watchable, most impactful, most consequential player the Indiana Fever have ever had on their roster.
And of course we want her to be out there. I think there are times where you have to try to save a player from themselves when they want to do too much, and that's where it's like, okay.
Now let me talk about the pattern, because this is not an isolated incident. This is not one bad coaching decision in one difficult game. This is a recurring, undeniable pattern of behavior that has played out multiple times already, and the people running this organization have done nothing to address it. We watched it against the LA Sparks. Stephanie White said the cap was 20 minutes. Caitlin Clark played 15. The Fever won that game, and the win got used to reinforce the narrative that the team is functional without their best player fully unleashed. Think about what that means. Stephanie White restricts Caitlin Clark's minutes. The team wins anyway because the opponent was beatable, and then that win becomes evidence that the restrictions are working. It is a closed loop of bad logic. It insulates the coaching staff from accountability because the scoreboard gave them cover. But now the opponent is the Las Vegas Aces. Now there is no cover. If the Indiana Fever lose this game, with Caitlin Clark on a minutes restriction, with Stephanie White pulling her in and out in short bursts, with the rotation pattern we already watched against the Sparks, the loss will be blamed on Caitlin Clark not being fully healthy. The narrative will be that she was not ready, that the back injury slowed her down, that the team needs more time to integrate her back into the lineup. And none of that narrative will mention Stephanie White's name. None of it will mention the 15 minutes against the Sparks when the cap was 20. None of it will mention the math that does not add up when you compare what Stephanie White says to what Stephanie White does. That is the most ruthless part of this entire situation. If the Fever win, Stephanie White gets credit for managing the roster carefully. If the Fever lose, Caitlin Clark's health becomes the explanation. Stephanie White cannot lose the narrative, and Caitlin Clark cannot win it. That is not a coincidence. That is a structure. That is how this organization has been operating. And the people who run it, the people who set the culture, who hired Stephanie White, who have watched this play out and said nothing publicly, they are complicit in every single minute of it. And then there is the press conference moment that nobody in the mainstream coverage is talking about. Because it was not just Stephanie White at that podium. There was someone else in that room. A voice that jumped in to clarify something that did not need clarifying. Someone from the organizational side who felt the need to step in and add context to Stephanie White's answer about the injury designation. The clarification was that the previous game was a scheduled rest decision, not a back flare-up, that it was premeditated, that the designation was chosen deliberately, so it would not look like the back had fired up again. Read that back. The organization premeditated a rest decision, chose a specific injury designation to manage the public perception of that decision, and then had someone jump in at a press conference to make sure the framing was correct. That is not medical transparency. That is image management. That is an organization that is more concerned with how the situation looks than with what is actually happening to their franchise player and what it is costing her on the court.
She's moving, and some of it will be strategy, based on having her for fourth quarter, saving some minutes for the fourth quarter, saving some minutes for the second half.
And then Stephanie White said something else. Something that the mainstream press is treating as a thoughtful, nuanced coaching insight, but that I want you to hear in its full context, because in its full context it is one of the most revealing things she has said all season. A reporter brought up the fact that Caitlin Clark, over a year ago, had said she does not believe in mental restrictions. And the reporter asked Stephanie White how going through these injuries had changed Clark's thinking on that. Stephanie White's answer was that there is no substitute for experience, that you do not know what you do not know, that the schedule is more compressed than ever, that there is more sports science involved than just wanting to play. And then she said something that I need you to hear directly, because it is the clearest window into how this coaching staff actually thinks about Caitlin Clark. Here it is. Listen closely. She said it, with cameras rolling. There are times where you have to save a player from themselves. That is the framing. That is how Stephanie White thinks about Caitlin Clark. Not as a superstar who needs to be unleashed. Not as a franchise player who needs to be given every possible opportunity to dominate. But as a player who needs to be saved from herself. A player who wants to do too much. A player whose competitive instincts are a liability that the coaching staff has to manage and contain. Let me say that back to you so you do not miss it. The head coach of the Indiana Fever went on camera and told reporters that her job, in part, is to save Caitlin Clark from Caitlin Clark. That Caitlin Clark's desire to play, her desire to compete, her desire to be out there, those are things that need to be checked and controlled, not celebrated and channeled. That is the philosophical framework inside which Caitlin Clark is operating every single day she walks into that building. Her head coach fundamentally views her competitive fire as a problem to be managed, rather than a weapon to be deployed. And here is why that framing is so catastrophically dangerous for this franchise. Caitlin Clark is not a player who thrives in a controlled, rationed environment. She is a player who thrives in chaos. She thrives when the game is moving fast and she is making reads and finding angles and creating moments that nobody else on that floor can create. She thrives when she is trusted. When she is given the ball and the minutes and the runway to impose herself on a game. Every time Stephanie White pulls her off the floor to protect a minutes cap, she is not saving Caitlin Clark. She is interrupting her. She is cutting off the momentum that makes her dangerous. She is, whether she intends to or not, making Caitlin Clark less effective in the minutes she does play, by ensuring she never gets deep enough into a game to find her highest gear. Now let me render the verdict on all of this, because we are not just documenting what happened. We are predicting what comes next. And the predictions are not optimistic. Prediction 1. Stephanie White will not give Caitlin Clark more than 22 minutes in this game against the Aces, regardless of what the score is, regardless of how well Clark is playing, and regardless of what the team needs in the moment. The stated cap is 20 to 25. The real cap, based on what we watched against the Sparks, is lower. And the rotation pattern, in and out, never more than a few minutes at a stretch, will ensure that even the minutes she does play are fractured and ineffective. Prediction 2. If the Indiana Fever lose this game to the Las Vegas Aces, the narrative will not be that Stephanie White mismanaged the rotation. The narrative will be that Caitlin Clark was not healthy enough to make the difference. The injury designation, the minutes restriction, the careful language about endurance and sports science, all of it will be deployed retroactively to explain the loss in a way that protects the coaching staff and puts the weight of the defeat on the player's physical condition rather than the coach's decisions. That is the structure that has been built, and it will function exactly the way it was designed to function. Prediction 3. The moment this minutes restriction situation becomes undeniable, the moment the gap between what Stephanie White says and what Stephanie White does becomes too large to paper over, the organizational response will be to lean harder on the injury narrative, more scheduled rest designations, more press conference language about sports science and long-term health and wellness, more voices jumping in at the podium to clarify the framing. Because the one thing this organization cannot afford is for the conversation to become about coaching accountability rather than player health. And prediction 4, and this is the one that matters most, is that Caitlin Clark is going to keep being Caitlin Clark, regardless of what any of this looks like from the outside. She is going to walk into that arena against the Las Vegas Aces, and in whatever minute she is given, she is going to compete with everything she has. Because that is who she is. Because she is the kind of player who, in Stephanie White's own words, wants to play, wants to be out there, and has to be saved from herself. And the brutal, soul-crushing irony of this entire situation is that the very thing Stephanie White is trying to contain, that relentless, agonizing competitive drive, is the exact thing that makes Caitlin Clark worth watching in the first place. The Indiana Fever did not become must-see television because of conservative roster management. They became must-see television because Caitlin Clark is electric and terrifying and capable of things that make you stop whatever you are doing and stare at the screen. Every minute she sits on that bench is a minute the league loses. Every rotation that pulls her out before she finds her rhythm is a rotation that costs the Fever a real chance to win. And every press conference where Stephanie White talks about saving her from herself is a press conference that tells you everything you need to know about why this franchise is not maximizing what it has. Now I want to bring in the one piece of this press conference that crystallizes the entire problem in a single exchange, because it is the most telling moment in the whole thing, and it has been almost completely ignored by the people covering this team. A reporter asked Stephanie White directly about how she anticipates using Caitlin Clark's minutes against the Aces. And Stephanie White's answer was that it depends on how Clark feels and how she looks. That the team wants to expand the time she is on the floor without having long periods where she is sitting and getting stiff. That some of it will be collaborative, with Clark letting the staff know how she feels. That some of it will be looking at her movement patterns objectively. And then she said the part that should alarm every single person who watches this team. Some of it will be strategy-based. Strategy based on saving minutes for the fourth quarter, saving minutes for the second half. Here is that line one more time, because I want it to land. Saving minutes for the fourth quarter, saving minutes for the second half. That is the strategy. Not deploying your best player to win the first half. Not putting her on the floor and letting her take over a game from the opening tip. Saving her, rationing her. Managing her like a limited resource rather than trusting her to be the player she is. And here is the thing that nobody on television will say out loud about that strategy. It does not work against the Las Vegas Aces. You cannot spot the Aces a first half and then try to claw back in the fourth quarter with a player who has been sitting on the bench watching the game get away from them. A'ja Wilson does not give you that kind of time. The Aces do not give you that kind of cushion. If the Indiana Fever fall behind in the first half because Caitlin Clark is being rationed and managed and saved for later, there may not be a later worth saving her for. The deficit will be too large. The momentum will be too far gone. And then Stephanie White will put Clark on the floor in the fourth quarter of a game that is already out of reach. And the minutes she does play will look ineffective because the game context is impossible. And that will become the next piece of evidence in the narrative that the team is better without her. This is the trap. This is the agonizing, deliberate mathematical trap that has been constructed around Caitlin Clark by the people running this franchise. And the only way out of it is for someone in that building to make a different decision, to look at what they have in Caitlin Clark and trust it. To give her 30-plus minutes against a team that demands 30-plus minutes from your best player. To let her play basketball the way she plays basketball when she is not being managed and contained and saved from herself. That is not a complicated ask. That is not a radical position. That is just basketball. Let your best player play. Let her find her rhythm. Let her impose herself on the game. Let her be the reason you win or the reason you lose, but let her be the reason, not a footnote in a press conference about endurance and movement patterns and the skeleton song. Caitlin Clark is out there right now. She is practicing. She is preparing. She is doing everything she is supposed to do to be ready for this game. And the question hanging over this entire franchise, the question that this press conference raised and did not answer, is whether the people making decisions around her are doing the same. Here is the forced choice question for everyone watching this video. And I want you to answer it in the comments right now, because this is the conversation that actually matters. Do you believe Stephanie White is genuinely managing Caitlin Clark's health responsibly? Or do you believe the minutes restrictions are about something else entirely, and the injury language is cover for a coaching philosophy that does not trust its own best player? That is the question. Not whether Clark is healthy, not whether the Fever can win. The question is whether you believe what Stephanie White is telling you, given what you have already watched her do. She said 20 minutes against the Sparks. Clark played 15. She is saying 20 to 25 against the Aces. She said it was 10 more minutes when the math says 5. She said strategy involves saving Clark for the fourth quarter. She said part of her job is saving Clark from herself. You have the receipts. You have the press conference. You have the numbers. Make your call in the comments. This is Rim Run. If this video gave you something the mainstream coverage is not giving you, hit that like button right now. It is the single most important thing you can do to help this channel keep doing this work. Subscribe if you are not already subscribed, and hit the bell so you do not miss the next video, because we will be back the moment this game ends with the full breakdown of exactly what Stephanie White did with those minutes, and whether the story she told at that press conference matches the story the box score tells. We will be right here. Do not go anywhere.